Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Yesterday, the destroyer USS Kidd went into dry dock in Houma, Louisiana. One of the common questions I've seen posted on their stuff is very similar to questions we were getting in dry dock that I don't know if we ever filmed a video specifically on. We almost certainly answered it in other videos, but never like specifically I am answering this question. The big question is, how do you plan the work that you're going to do in dry dock? Now, obviously, I can't speak to what they're doing, but they've got a YouTube channel too where they're talking about their project. There's a link for that in the description below if you'd like to go and check out their work. They are just beginning their dry dock project, so subscribe now, tune in, see what they're doing. Now, in terms of how we prepared for the scope of work we needed, I've worked on this ship for almost 7 years. We had like 6 years of data of what needed to be done. We knew when the last time certain maintenance had been done. We knew what systems we still use and what systems we don't. So that really helped us plan it. So the main things we were doing are the bog standard that even if this was an active ship, that would be the bare minimum you do in dry dock. Things like blasting the growth off the bottom, repainting the bottom of the ship. Other things like patching holes, we had a pretty good idea where there were holes. For example, the blank over the sea chest opening, we knew that had a hole in it that we had patched, but we wanted to do a more permanent repair. And obviously, if one of those 160 openings had a hole over the course of its 30-year life, we wanted to check all of them. So that really helped us plan that scope of work. Other things we knew we wanted to deal with, but didn't know how until we got the ship out of the water. For example, the ship's propellers. We didn't know what condition they would be in, so we had in the scope of work that dealing with the propellers may or may not happen, whether that was going to be painting the propellers or removing the propellers entirely, and we had had those conversations with the yard, so we were waiting to see when we got the ship out of the water. And thankfully it ended up being the smallest scope of work, which then allowed us to spend money on boxing in the shafts since the propellers were still on there putting pressure on them. Likewise, Kidd almost certainly is going to do some blasting and painting of their underwater hull. They're almost certainly going to do some patchwork on steel plate that has holes in it or is really thin, like we did an ultrasonic survey in the yard to gauge where ours was. I'm sure they're doing something similar. They've been pretty public that they had some leaks that was causing them issues. That's why they had to go into dry dock and why they have to raise money to do extra work. If it was an active ship, there would also be a lot of things inside the ship that you would need technical experts for. Because it's just easier to get those technical experts and the things that they need onto the ship when it's in a yard. For example, things that require a crane. The Battleship doesn't have a crane on its pier. We're limited in the weight of crane that we can have on our pier by the pier's capabilities. Bringing in a barge crane is really expensive. So it takes major capital projects to get that. And when we do get it, we try to do everything all at once. So likewise, when Slater went into dry dock, you know, I've always said, don't do anything in dry dock that you can do back at home. So for the Battleship, we exclusively focused on things below the waterline and on the exterior of the ship. Anything inside we can do at home, anything above the waterline we can do at home. Slater couldn't get a crane to do some of the work on their mast at home. So it made sense to do it when they were in the dry dock. They already had this capital project going, they had access to a crane, so they did work on their mast there. That would have been about 4 years ago. It was probably the first dry docking we did on this channel. Likewise, Battleship New Jersey, we didn't really have anything like that we dealt with during this yard period. When we bring the crane in to put the mast back on, we're going to try and do some extra crane work at that time. And I'm not sure if Kidd has any work like that going on. But if they do have that planned in the scope of work, then it might make sense to do it in the yard rather than in the middle of the Mississippi River. Also, Kidd will be doing work on the inside of the ship where New Jersey isn't, and that's largely because of the work they're doing on the outside of the ship. Kidd has single wall thickness in most of the hull, so if they're patching a hole, they have to remove all of the objects from the habitable space inside the ship so they can do firewall. New Jersey didn't need to do that because we've got tanks basically over the entire perimeter. And so those tanks don't have insulation on the inside that might catch on fire. They don't have benches or beds or equipment, electrical stuff mounted there. So we certainly inspected all the spaces where we were going to do hot work ahead of time, but we didn't have to do major work removing objects. And if we're going to remove all the interior fittings, well, then it just makes sense to do painting and other restoration work on the inside. We didn't have to do that. Kidd likely will. And that goes for USS the Sullivans when she goes into dry dock probably next year. I'm sure those guys are watching the work that is happening on Kidd right now because the same class of ship, it's going to be very, very similar. In addition to the things we just knew, some things like cleaning out our 3 CHT tanks, we knew had not been done since the ship was turned into a museum. We still use that. It's one of the few original ship systems that we use, so we wanted to clean that out when we were there. Very difficult to get a honey truck up to the ship and then get all the plumbing down to it. So it was much easier to do while we were in the yard. Other things we knew about because we did surveys ahead of time. We had dive surveys of the ship. We, as the staff, went through and surveyed the interior of the ship to see if there were additional things we had to do. And then all of that was done more than a year before we went into dry dock, so we could plan out the scope of work, so we could talk to the yard with it, so we could line up the contractors. So those are some of the broad strokes of how we plan the scope of work for New Jersey's dry docking, and likely some of the similar considerations that the folks on Kidd or the folks up on the Sullivans or other folks who are dry docking have also taken into account over the same time period. The folks on Kidd almost certainly had all this planned out about a year ago. And the folks on the Sullivans are currently planning now what they will be doing in a year or so. Yes, congratulations to the Sullivans for getting some extra funding. They still have a ways to go, so be sure to check out their channel and support them. The more they raise now ahead of the project, the more they can plan ahead of time as opposed to scrambling when they're actually in the yard. Congratulations to USS Kidd for safely making it into dry dock on Tuesday of this week, August 13th, 2024. Again, there's a link in the description below to their channel so you can follow the work that they're doing over the next couple of months, and a link to their donate page so you can support their project. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals. Remember to support the other museum ships out there at the links in the description below. You can support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about our museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.